My name is Mara Ellison. I was 31 years old, a pediatric occupational therapist, and exactly 7 weeks away from marrying Colin Reeves when he came home from a concert and discovered that I had left him. I was not in our Raleigh apartment when he opened the door. Everything I know about those first few minutes came later, from the messages he sent, the details he repeated, and the objects I had deliberately placed where he could not miss them. The living room lamp was on, my coat was gone, so were my medication, work bag, and the small suitcase we kept in the hall closet. On the kitchen counter sat the hospital discharge packet he had watched a nurse hand me hours earlier. My engagement ring rested on top of it. Beside the ring was a folded sheet of paper with his name written across the front in my unsteady left-handed printing. Colin was still wearing the paper wristband from the concert when he picked up my note. By then, he already knew I had been in a car accident. He knew I had a concussion, stitches near my hairline, a fractured wrist, and instructions not to spend the night alone. What he did not know was whether the note meant I needed a few days away or whether the wedding we had spent 10 months planning was already over. The answer frightened me too. Leaving had been the clearest decision I had made all evening, but clarity did not stop my hands from shaking or make 4 years of love disappear. Before I tell you how a farewell concert became the night my engagement ended, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like this video. And as you listen, ask yourself whether love can survive when the person who promises to show up chooses somewhere else. To explain what I wrote in that note, I have to go back to the part of our relationship I kept calling harmless. Colin and I met 4 years earlier while volunteering at a neighborhood food drive. He was the man who remembered everyone's name, found extra boxes before anyone asked, and stayed until the last folding table had been loaded into the van. I liked the steadiness of him. He liked that I did not mistake loud confidence for competence. We were good together in ways that mattered. He made coffee before I woke up on early clinic days. I could tell when a project at his audio-visual company had gone wrong by the way he set his keys down. We laughed easily, kept our finances organized, and wanted the same kind of home: calm, welcoming, and nothing like the houses in which either of us had learned to brace for conflict. When he proposed, I said yes before he finished asking. 10 months later, our wedding had become a second job that mostly belonged to me. I tracked deposits, answered the caterer, corrected the guest list, and reminded Colin about tasks he had volunteered to handle. He always apologized and usually completed them once a deadline became urgent. I told myself that planning was simply one of my strengths. The one subject we never resolved was Tessa Ward. Tessa had been Colin's best friend since they were 17. She worked for an arts nonprofit, loved live music, and could turn an ordinary evening into an event. When Colin's father died, Tessa stayed close during the year when several friends drifted away. Their private definition of loyalty came from that period. They were the two people who always showed up. I never believed they were sleeping together. That was what made the problem difficult to explain. If I objected to a late call or a changed plan, Colin answered the accusation he thought I was making instead of the concern I had actually raised. "You know there has never been anything romantic between us," he would say. "I know," I would answer. "That isn't what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" I would try to explain that Tessa's bad evenings became emergencies while mine became conversations. If she called during dinner, Colin stepped away because she sounded upset. If our plans collided with a promise he had made her months earlier, our plans were the flexible ones. When I told him the pattern bothered me, he heard a demand to abandon a lifelong friend. 3 weeks before the accident, we had set aside a Sunday afternoon to finish the music selections and send the caterer our final schedule. Tessa called while our laptops were open because her divorce anniversary had caught her off guard. Colin said he would speak to her for 10 minutes. 40 minutes later, he was still walking circles on the balcony while I completed both tasks. When he returned, he thanked me for understanding and promised to make it up to me. I did not begrudge Tessa a difficult day. What unsettled me was that her sadness automatically became his responsibility, while my frustration became evidence that I needed to be more generous. "I need you to trust me," he said after our most serious argument about it. Trust was a word that ended discussions without solving them. I did trust that he was faithful. I did not trust that he understood emotional priority, but I was terrified of becoming the jealous fiancé everyone expected whenever a man had a female best friend. So I softened my language, accepted his reassurance, and kept waiting for marriage to create a boundary that engagement had not. The concert tickets had been purchased 8 months before the accident. The band was doing a farewell tour, and Colin and Tessa had followed them since adolescence. He described the show as the end of an era. I understood why it mattered. I also assumed that if something truly serious happened, the decision would make itself. That was my mistake. Decisions do not make themselves. People make them, and then they explain why they had no choice. On the afternoon of the accident, I left work with a headache from staring at a venue spreadsheet and a message from Colin reminding me that he and Tessa planned to leave early enough to avoid arena traffic. I replied that I remembered. The final venue payment was due in 4 days, and I intended to review the contract when I got home. I never reached the apartment. The light in front of me was green. I remember that clearly because I had enough time to see the other car enter the intersection and think, with absurd calm, that it was not going to stop. Then there was metal, glass, and the violent sideways pull of the seatbelt. My car spun far enough that the world outside the windshield changed direction. Something struck the right side of my head. When the vehicle stopped, the horn was sounding continuously, although my hands were nowhere near it. A stranger stood outside my window asking whether I could hear him. I tried to unlock the door with my right hand, and pain shot from my wrist to my elbow. Blood moved warm and slow along my temple. I told the stranger my name because it seemed important that at least one person know it. The next clear moment was inside an ambulance. A paramedic asked who should be contacted. "My fiancé," I said. "Colin Reeves." At the hospital, time became a collection of bright rooms and repeated questions. I answered my birth date, followed a nurse's finger with my eyes, and tried not to vomit when someone helped me sit up. Imaging showed no bleeding in my brain and no internal injuries. The doctor called that the good news. The rest was a mild concussion, a hairline fracture in my right wrist, deep bruising across my shoulder and ribs, and a cut near my hairline that needed stitches. None of it was life-threatening. All of it hurt. Colin arrived while a nurse was fitting a brace around my wrist. His face changed when he saw the dried blood near my ear. "Mara, God, are you okay?" He crossed the room and kissed my forehead, carefully avoiding the bandage. For several minutes, he was exactly the person I had called. He found my phone charger, spoke to the nurse, and asked whether I needed to be admitted. "She can go home tonight," the nurse said, "but she cannot be alone for the first 24 hours. Someone needs to monitor her symptoms, wake her periodically, and bring her back if the headache, confusion, vomiting, or dizziness gets worse." Colin nodded. "I'll be with her." The certainty in his voice let me close my eyes. Then his phone vibrated. He silenced it without looking, but it vibrated again a minute later. When the nurse left, he checked the screen. I saw Tessa's name above several messages. "She knows about the accident?" I asked. "I told her you were being checked out." He put the phone face down. "She just doesn't know what we're doing yet." I stared at him, waiting for the rest of that sentence to become unnecessary. "What do you mean, what we're doing?" "Nothing. I mean, obviously, if you need me." The nurse just said I need someone. "I know." He rubbed both hands over his face. "I know that. I'm not saying I would leave you alone." His phone vibrated again between us. I felt nausea rise, and it had nothing to do with the concussion. "Then tell Tessa you aren't going." "I haven't said I'm going. You haven't said you're staying." He stood and walked to the foot of the bed, as if distance might make the conversation less ugly. "The main set doesn't start for a while. Celia could be here by the time they discharge you. I could go for part of it and come straight back." My sister lived 35 minutes away. I had texted her from the examination room, but she was still at work and had not seen the message. Celia had protected me throughout our parents' divorce, when every handoff between houses seemed to require one of us to interpret an adult's anger for the other. As we grew older, I became determined not to need that kind of rescue. I rarely called her unless I had already solved the problem. Colin knew this. He also knew that Celia would come if I asked, which allowed him to treat her reliability like a resource he could schedule without consulting either of us. Celia doesn't even know I need her yet. Then I'll call her. You told the nurse you would be with me. And I will be. I'm talking about a couple of hours, Mara. You heard the doctor. The scans were clear. He pulled the visitor's chair closer and took my left hand. His thumb moved across my knuckles in the familiar rhythm he used whenever I was anxious. That tenderness confused me more than indifference would have. He was not acting like a man who did not love me. He was acting like a man who believed love allowed him to leave because the relationship would still be waiting when he returned. The scans were clear. I was not dying. Those facts became tools in his hands almost immediately. I have a concussion, a mild one. He said it softly, which somehow made it worse. I turned my face toward the wall. The movement made the room tilt. Why are you asking me this? Because these tickets were impossible to get, because it is the last tour, because Tessa and I have planned this for 8 months, and because I don't want you to think that going means I don't care about what happened. He had arranged the reasons carefully, with my feelings placed last like a problem he hoped the other facts would solve. What did you tell her? That you're stable and probably coming home. Did you tell her I can't be alone? He hesitated for less than a second. I told her Celia can stay with you. Celia hasn't agreed to that. She will. She's your sister. That answer stayed with me. He trusted Celia to accept a responsibility he was already negotiating his way out of. The doctor returned with the discharge packet and repeated the warning signs. Colin listened. He asked a question about pain medication. He signed the line confirming that the instructions had been explained to the adult taking me home. There was no confusion about what he knew. By the time a transport aide brought a wheelchair, Celia had called me back. Her voice sharpened when I explained the injuries. I'm leaving now, she said. Traffic looks bad. It may take 40 minutes. Colin heard her through the phone. He checked the time. In the parking area, he helped me into his car and fastened the belt when my wrist would not cooperate. He drove carefully. He kept asking whether the light bothered me. For 10 minutes, his kindness almost convinced me I had imagined the conversation. At home, he brought me water, placed the discharge packet on the kitchen counter, and found a blanket. Then he changed his shirt. Not into pajamas, into the black shirt he had planned to wear to the concert. I watched him from the couch. So you decided. Celia is coming. That wasn't my question. I can still stay if you tell me you need me to. The sentence landed harder than the crash. He had heard the doctor. He had seen me struggle with the seatbelt. He had watched me close my eyes against the apartment lights, and he still needed me to perform the final piece of labor for him, make the decision, become the obstacle, and accept responsibility for Tessa's disappointment. Would you be angry if I went for the main set? He asked. I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in 7 weeks. My head throbbed beneath the bandage. My right hand was already swelling inside the brace. I understood that if I asked him to stay, his body might remain in the apartment, but some part of him would spend the night measuring what I had cost him. So I stopped asking to be chosen. Don't let her down, I said. Relief moved across his face before he hid it. Thank you. I swear, I'll come straight home afterward. Celia will be here any minute. He kissed my forehead again, picked up his keys, and left 22 minutes before my sister arrived. The apartment became so quiet that I could hear the refrigerator motor stop and start. I sat on the couch with my left hand wrapped around the glass of water Colin had brought me. The gesture should have felt caring. Instead, the glass seemed like the final item on a checklist he had completed before giving himself permission to go. My phone lit up with a message from him saying he had made it to the arena and asking whether Celia had arrived. I did not answer. I could not decide which truth hurt more, that he had left before knowing I was safe, or that he expected me to reassure him after he did it. When Celia finally opened the apartment door with the spare key, she was breathing hard from hurrying. She took one look at my bandage, brace, and face and dropped her bag beside the couch. "Where is Colin?" "At the concert." She stared at me. "He took you home and then went?" "The tickets were bought months ago." That isn't what I asked. I told her the scans were clear. I told her the concussion was mild. I told her Colin planned to return after the main set. Every explanation sounded thinner once I heard myself say it aloud. Celia picked up the discharge packet and read it. She checked the time of my next medication, lowered the lights, placed a bowl near the couch in case I became sick, and asked whether the dizziness was worse than it had been at the hospital. She did all of that before offering an opinion. Then she sat beside me and said, "Do you want to be here when he comes back?" The question was different from telling me to leave. It gave me room to hear my own answer. I looked around the apartment. Wedding samples covered one end of the dining table. A seating chart was taped to the wall. Our life appeared intact everywhere I looked, but I no longer trusted the promise underneath it. "No," I said, "I don't." Because of my wrist and dizziness, Celia packed while I directed her. She put medication, toiletries, work clothes, my laptop, and the few personal documents I would need into the suitcase from the hall closet. We left most of my belongings where they were. I was not pretending 4 years could fit into one bag. At the kitchen counter, I removed my engagement ring with my left hand. My fingers resisted as if my body had not caught up with my decision. I set it on the discharge packet and found a sheet of paper in the wedding binder. Writing with my left hand was slow. That helped. It kept the note from becoming cruel. "Colin, I am safe with Celia. Do not call or come to her house for 72 hours. The wedding is paused. I did not leave because you attended a concert. I left because you knew I should not be alone, asked me to make your choice easier, and treated my resignation as permission. Use the next 3 days to write down what happened without changing the parts that make you uncomfortable. Mara." I folded the page once and wrote his name on the front. Then Celia helped me into my coat, carried the suitcase, and waited while I looked back at the apartment. I did not feel powerful when I closed the door. I felt injured, nauseated, and terrified that I was ruining my own future. But for the first time that evening, the decision belonged entirely to me. Colin returned after the concert and found exactly what I had left. He called 6 times before Celia silenced my phone. Then the messages began. "Are you safe? Please tell me where you are. I know this looks bad, but you told me to go. Mara, we cannot throw away our wedding over a concert." I read the last message twice, through a headache that made the words blur. I had told him where I was. I had told him why I left. Still, he had already reduced the entire night to a concert and my reaction to it. That was when I understood that leaving the apartment had been the easy boundary. The difficult one would be refusing to return while he continued telling the story in a way that protected him. The first night at Celia's townhouse, she woke me every 2 hours exactly as the hospital instructed. Each time, she asked my name, the date, and whether my headache had changed. By morning, the nausea had eased, but my right hand had swollen until the brace felt too tight. Daylight made the practical losses harder to ignore. I could not twist the cap from my medication bottle, fasten my own bra, wash my hair without protecting the stitches, or look at a screen for more than a few minutes. The rehabilitation center placed me on short medical leave because dizziness and a fractured dominant wrist made treating children unsafe. I spent my working life helping patients ask for assistance without shame. At Celia's kitchen table, I discovered how quickly I still translated my own need into embarrassment. She never made me thank her for ordinary care. She opened containers, tracked medication, and left water beside me without turning any of it into proof of sacrifice. The contrast was so clear that I kept trying not to look directly at it. Colin's messages shifted with the hours. Panic became reassurance. Reassurance became explanation. He offered to bring my medication, call the insurance company, finish the vendor schedule, and sleep on the couch if I came home. He sent a photograph of the discharge packet and wrote that he understood he should have waited until Celia arrived. Then he added that he had never intended to leave me without help. That sentence let him apologize for 22 minutes instead of the choice itself. One voicemail lasted nearly 6 minutes. Colin described driving carefully, bringing me water, arranging for Celia to come, and promising to return. He listed every caring thing he had done around the decision, as though enough good details could surround the abandonment until it disappeared. Near the end, his voice cracked. "I came home, Mara. I did exactly what I said I would do. You weren't there." He sounded genuinely wounded that returning had not restored the moment he left. I listened twice, not because it changed my mind, but because part of me still believed the person who hurt most must be the person telling the truth. I wanted one of his explanations to make the pain smaller. 4 years did not vanish because I recognized a pattern. I remembered the coffee he made, the way he could make me laugh after difficult days at the clinic, and the home we had planned. By the second day, I was asking Celia whether pausing a wedding over one terrible decision was unreasonable. "Maybe," she said. I looked at her, surprised. "But you didn't ask whether it was terrible enough. You asked whether you could trust him when needing you became inconvenient." She handed me my medication and left the conclusion with me. Tessa messaged that afternoon. "Mara, I just found out you left. Colin told me Celia was already with you. I would never have expected him to leave you alone. I am so sorry. Are you safe?" I stared at the line about Celia. Colin had told me only that she could stay. Apparently, by the time he reached the arena, possibility had become fact. I replied that I was safe, but not ready to talk. Tessa respected that. Colin did not. On the third morning, the venue coordinator emailed both of us to confirm the final payment due the next day. I wrote back asking her to freeze all new charges and send the cancellation provisions. Colin called before she answered. The contract required a substantial payment to preserve the date. Canceling would cost deposits we had already paid, but proceeding would commit us to far more. The numbers made the emotional uncertainty measurable. Colin wanted the calendar protected while we worked things out. I could not justify buying a future simply because admitting we might not have one was painful. I let it ring once, then sent him a message reminding him that the 72 hours had not ended. He replied that canceling contracts was not the same as taking space. I agreed. That was why I had asked the venue to stop collecting money for a wedding neither of us could honestly confirm. At 6 that evening, my boundary expired. Colin sent one final message asking for a conversation in person. I agreed to meet him the next morning at a quiet cafe between Celia's townhouse and our apartment. I chose a public place because I wanted to hear him without being surrounded by the life he expected me to resume. He was already seated when I arrived. My bruising had darkened across my collarbone, the stitches pulled whenever I frowned, and my wrist remained fixed inside the brace. Colin stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "You look worse." "Bruises do that." He reached toward me, then stopped. "Can I hug you?" "No." The answer hurt him. I saw it, and the part of me trained to soften discomfort almost apologized. We sat. Colin pushed an untouched cup of tea toward me because he remembered what I ordered when coffee made me nauseated. Even then, he knew how to care in details. "I wrote everything down like you asked," he said. He placed 2 folded pages on the table. "I should have stayed until Celia arrived. I know that. I handled it badly. Start at the hospital. Mara, it's all there." Then saying it should be easy, he breathed out. "The nurse said you needed someone overnight. You had called Celia. The concert was starting soon, and I asked if you would be okay with me going for the main set. Had Celia answered when you first asked?" "No." "Did you know she would agree?" "I knew she would come for you." "That wasn't the question." His eyes dropped to the paper. "No, I didn't know yet." "What did you tell Tessa?" "That you were stable." "Only that?" He looked toward the window. "I told her Celia would be there." "You told her Celia was already with me." His attention snapped back. "Did Tessa contact you?" "Answer me." "I may have said she was there because she was on her way. I wasn't trying to lie. I was trying not to create more panic." "Whose panic?" He did not answer. I unfolded his written chronology. It described my scans as clear before mentioning the concussion. It said Celia had agreed to help before acknowledging she was still driving. It quoted my words, but not the question that produced them. You wrote that I told you to go. You did. I said, don't let her down. How was I supposed to hear that? You were supposed to hear that your injured fiancé knew the person you were afraid to disappoint wasn't her. His jaw tightened. That isn't fair. You could have said you needed me to stay. I slid the discharge instructions across the table. The nurse said it. The doctor said it. I said I had a concussion. You signed this. Why did the request have to come from me one more time? Because I wanted to know how you felt. No. You wanted me to become responsible for your choice. He leaned back as if I had struck him. I made one mistake. One. You are talking like our entire relationship was a lie. No. I'm asking what the mistake tells me. It tells you I misjudged a situation. You manage installation crews for a living. When a site has a safety requirement, do you ask the injured person whether following it would be convenient? His expression hardened. Our relationship is not one of my job sites. You're right. I should have mattered more than a procedure. He folded his pages with sharp, precise movements. I have shown up for you hundreds of times. When your licensing exam was delayed, when you were sick last winter, when work overwhelmed you, I was there. I know. That is why this hurts. Then why doesn't any of it count? It counts as our history. It does not erase what you chose when staying required you to lose something you wanted. He looked genuinely lost. Colin understood care as an accumulated record. I understood it as trust in the next vulnerable moment. We had been using the same word for 2 different promises. I don't think it was a lie. My voice shook, but I kept it level. I think you love me. I also think you believed loving me meant I would still be here after you chose someone else when I needed you. For the first time, he had no immediate explanation. Then he looked at my bare left hand. Are you ending the engagement? The truthful answer was that I still did not know. I am not restarting it today. He closed his eyes. The venue payment is due. I froze it. We can postpone for 2 weeks. Canceling now will cost us deposits we may not recover. Paying tomorrow would cost more. This is our wedding, Mara. Then trust should matter more than the payment schedule. I left the pages on the table and walked out without hugging him. In Celia's car, grief hit with such force that I bent forward against the seatbelt and cried until my ribs hurt. Clarity had not made me stop loving him. It had only removed love as an excuse to ignore what happened. For the next 2 days, I moved between certainty and bargaining. I imagined returning with new rules, no interrupted dates, no private discussion of our relationship with Tessa, no unilateral changes to shared plans. Then I asked myself what rule could require a fiancé to remain after a doctor said his injured partner should not be alone. A boundary could organize future behavior. It could not manufacture the instinct I had believed was already there. At work, I often told parents that helping a child become independent did not mean waiting until the child was desperate enough to beg. Support worked best when need was noticed and answered. Remembering my own professional advice made Colin's final question at the apartment feel even more revealing. He had made obvious care conditional on my willingness to demand it. Over the next several days, Colin stopped calling repeatedly. His messages became carefully spaced and respectful. He arranged for the venue to hold our date temporarily, completed tasks I had been asking him to finish for months, and sent brief updates without demanding answers. Part of me saw change. Another part noticed that every action still aimed at preserving the wedding. Celia never told me which interpretation to choose. Grief makes old routines look like evidence, she said when I confessed that I missed our apartment. Missing home does not tell you whether it was safe. That evening, Tessa asked whether I was willing to see the messages Colin had sent before the concert. I said yes. She sent screenshots first, then called after I had read them. Her first message to Colin had asked whether they needed to skip the concert. His reply said I was stable, Celia was with me, and I had insisted that he go. Tessa asked whether he was certain. Colin answered that I did not want them to miss the show. There was no hidden declaration of love between them, no hotel receipt, no confession that they had been carrying on behind my back. Their messages were ordinary, which made them more useful. They showed exactly how Colin had converted my resignation into enthusiasm and Celia's future arrival into present care. I wanted to go, Tessa said over the phone, so when he gave me a version that made going acceptable, I accepted it. I should have called you. You thought I had a concussion and still went. Yes. Her voice broke, but she did not defend herself. I believed you were with your sister. That doesn't make it good. It only means I didn't know he had left you alone. I asked the question I had once feared most. Has anything romantic ever happened between you? No, never. I believed her. The messages supported her, but so did the way she answered. There was no offended performance, only shame. Tessa told me that after her divorce, Colin had become the person she called before anyone else. He answered late, changed plans, and treated her loneliness as something he could prevent. She had interpreted that access as proof their friendship had survived adulthood unchanged. I kept telling myself that because we weren't romantic, there couldn't be a boundary problem, she said. That was convenient for me, too. She admitted that she had noticed how often Mara and Colin plans moved while Colin and Tessa traditions did not. She had never demanded that he choose her over me in direct words. She had simply become accustomed to his doing it and accepted the result as natural. I don't want to lose my oldest friend, she said, but I also don't want a friendship that requires someone else to keep being reasonable. Colin keeps saying he was caught between us, she continued. He wasn't. I gave him an opening to cancel. He told me not to worry. I won't let him use me as the reason he had no choice. Her honesty did not make us friends. It did something more important. It returned responsibility to the person who had made the decision. 2 days later, our immediate families joined a video call that had originally been scheduled to discuss travel and the rehearsal dinner. I had wanted to cancel it, but relatives had already made reservations and needed accurate information. Before the call, 2 relatives had separately urged me not to make a permanent decision while recovering from a concussion. Another reminded me how much Colin loved me. None intended harm. They possessed only the version in which Colin attended a meaningful concert after arranging care and returned to find that I had disappeared. That was the danger of a simplified account. It did not need to be completely false. It only needed to remove the facts that made my response understandable. Colin spoke first. He said we were postponing because emotions had escalated after he attended a concert while I recovered from a minor accident. He sounded calm, sad, and reasonable. Before I could answer, Tessa interrupted from the edge of the call. That isn't the complete story. Colin stared at her square on the screen. Tessa explained that the hospital required supervision, that Celia had not arrived, and that Colin had described support that was not present. She did not dramatize it. She simply refused his edit. Why are you doing this? He asked. Because you keep making Mara responsible for the consequence. The silence that followed felt different from sympathy. It was the sound of a story losing its protection. I told our families that the wedding was not postponed. No final decision had been signed, but no one should retain travel plans or expect a new date. After the call, Colin sent one message. I cannot believe she chose your side. That sentence clarified what the screenshots had not. Colin saw care as a side people selected. Tessa's loyalty had mattered partly because it confirmed his. My patience had mattered because it prevented his choices from costing him anything. I thought about interrupted dinners, unfinished wedding tasks, and every time I had translated my discomfort into gentler language so he would not mistake it for jealousy. The accident had not created a new rule. It had made the old one impossible to ignore. I remembered Colin leaving a birthday dinner to spend an hour on the phone with Tessa after she argued with her mother. I remembered rescheduling our venue tour because Tessa needed help preparing an arts fundraiser. I remembered how he praised me afterward for being secure enough to understand. Each incident had seemed too small to challenge on its own. Together they formed a relationship economy in which Tessa received his urgency and I received gratitude for requiring less. Even our wedding labor had followed the pattern. Colin could delay something I needed because he trusted me to handle it. He could not delay something Tessa wanted because her disappointment felt like evidence that he had failed as a friend. Tessa's pain produced action. Mine produced negotiation. By the end of that week, I knew the engagement was over. I arranged to retrieve the rest of my belongings. Celia drove me but waited outside after confirming that I wanted to enter alone. My stitches had been removed, though the fading cut remained visible, and I could carry only light items with my left hand. When Colin opened the apartment door, he was dressed as if we were going somewhere important. The dining table had been cleared. Our engagement photographs, wedding binder, vendor confirmations, and seating chart were arranged across it. In the center, beside a vase of flowers, sat my ring. "I finished everything," he said. "The music, transportation schedule, vendor calls. I moved the payment date. We haven't lost the venue." He mistook my silence for surprise. "I know words aren't enough, so I wanted to show you. I can carry more. I can put us first." "You completed a checklist. I completed the things that made you feel alone. They were never the reason I felt alone." His composure slipped. "What else can I do? Tell me, and I will do it." The request had the same shape as the one he made after the hospital. He still needed me to design the correct choice for him and guarantee that performing it would restore the relationship. "You could have spent the last 2 weeks asking what needed to change even if I never came back," I said. "I am asking now." "No, you're asking for the combination that opens the door." He looked across the photographs and completed schedules. "Is trying to save us wrong?" "Trying is not wrong, but every task on this table assumes the wedding is still the goal. You have not considered that respecting me may mean helping end it." His eyes filled. "I don't know how to prove I choose you if you won't let me choose you now." "The hospital was when the choice cost you something. You can respect what I'm about to say without turning it into another problem to solve." He looked at the ring. "Mara, please. I am ending the engagement." For several seconds, neither of us moved. "Because I went to one concert? Because you knew I needed you, left before you knew I was safe, changed the story for Tessa, and then kept changing it for everyone else. The concert showed me the rule. Everything afterward showed me you needed the rule to remain invisible." He sank into a chair. "I love you. I love you too." That was the cruelest, honest thing I had to give him. Love remained, and the engagement still had to end. I packed while he sat at the table. He did not block me or argue again. Before leaving, I placed my apartment key beside the ring. He closed his hand around neither one. The venue required both of us to attend a cancellation appointment the following week. After we signed the initial forms, the coordinator stepped out to copy them. Through the office's glass wall, the adjoining reception room stood empty. Chairs were stacked along one side. Afternoon light fell across the floor where our first dance was supposed to happen. Colin stared at that space. "Tessa stopped speaking to me every day." I waited. "She said she doesn't want to be the person I use to prove I'm loyal." He rubbed his palms together. "I've been seeing a counselor." "I'm glad." I kept trying to understand why I went. "You wanted the concert." "Yes, but that wasn't all of it." His voice was quiet now, without the practiced steadiness he had brought to the cafe. "I knew Tessa would be hurt immediately if I canceled." "I knew you would be hurt too, but I thought you would understand eventually. You always did." The admission hurt because it was finally accurate. "I made you the safer person to disappoint," he said. "I counted on your patience like it belonged to me." I looked through the glass at the empty room. For weeks, I had wanted him to understand that. Now that he did, nothing inside me moved toward reunion. The phrase he and Tessa had used for years came back to me. They always showed up. Colin had reached the hospital. He had driven me home. He had returned after the concert. Technically, he had appeared in every location. Celia had taught me the difference. Showing up was not arriving long enough to be seen. It was remaining when presence became inconvenient. "I needed you to understand this," I said. "But understanding it does not make me safe with you again. Thank you for saying it honestly. Is there any chance, later?" "No." He nodded once. The coordinator returned, and we signed the final cancellation. Because Colin had delayed the process while trying to preserve the date, he accepted the additional fee and agreed to reimburse the portion charged to my card. There was no dramatic fight over money. The loss already had a name larger than any deposit. The next months were quieter than the weeks before them. I stayed with Celia until the headaches stopped interfering with ordinary concentration and my wrist could manage basic tasks. Then I rented a one-bedroom apartment closer to the rehabilitation center. Returning to the clinic happened gradually. At first, I handled planning and observation while coworkers assisted with movements my wrist could not support. The children did not care that I was no longer engaged. They cared whether I listened, whether I kept my promises, and whether I celebrated effort that looked small to everyone else. Their uncomplicated trust helped ordinary life become important again. My new apartment was modest and initially sparse. I bought only what I needed and resisted the urge to make it look finished immediately. After months of planning a shared future down to table linens, an unfinished room felt honest. Celia helped me unpack, but she made me decide where everything belonged. Our relationship gradually returned from medication schedules and symptom checks to lunches, jokes, and arguments about whose turn it was to call our mother. Tessa and I exchanged one final message. She told me she had stepped back from Colin and was learning that boundaries were not the same as abandonment. I wished her well. We did not pretend the experience had made us friends. Colin paid every amount he had promised. Near the end of the 4th month, an envelope arrived without flowers or a request to meet. His letter did not explain the concert again. It acknowledged that he had known what I needed, distorted the circumstances, and treated my reliability as permission to fail me. He apologized without asking me to forgive him or respond. I read it once and placed it in a drawer. His honesty mattered. It did not recreate safety. At my final medical appointment, the receptionist handed me an updated information form. Colin's name still appeared on the emergency contact line. I crossed it out and wrote Celia's. The doctor cleared me to drive and return to full duties. My right wrist still ached when the weather changed, but it could turn a key again. That afternoon, I drove myself home. I carried one small grocery bag upstairs, unlocked the door to my apartment with my recovered hand, and stepped inside without leaving a note to explain where I had gone. For the first time in a long time, being alone did not feel like abandonment. It felt like knowing the person responsible for my future would stay.